I never imagined myself doing laundry in the middle of the night, but here I was. Life has a funny way of throwing stuff at you when you least expect it. My name's Mike, by the way. I'm 28, work long shifts at a greasy diner downtown, and honestly, laundry is the last thing I ever want to think about. But last night, after a crazy shift, I dragged myself home only to find that my roommate, Chris, had dumped his pile of dirty clothes on top of mine, completely filling our shared laundry basket. Typical Chris. Now, normally, I just wait until the next day to deal with it, but I was down to my last clean shirt. So, instead of getting some much-needed sleep, I figured I'd head to the 24-hour laundromat a few blocks away. It wasn't too far, and at 2 a.m., I figured the place would be empty. I like the idea of having the whole place to myself. No waiting for machines, no awkward small talk with strangers. Just me, my laundry, and maybe a podcast to keep me awake. The night was colder than I expected, and the streets were almost deserted as I walked over, carrying my overflowing laundry bag. When I got to the laundromat, it looked just as I expected, dead. The flickering neon sign buzzed above the entrance, casting this weird, pale light over the sidewalk. I pushed open the glass door and stepped inside. The place smelled like detergent and cheap cleaning products, but it wasn't a bad smell. Kind of comforting in a weird way. There was no one else around, which again was perfect. But as I scanned the room, I noticed something a little strange. One of the washing machines was already running. The dull hum of it echoed in the empty space, but there wasn't a soul in sight. The rest of the machines were off. The folding tables were clear, and the dryers were empty. Whoever started that machine must have left, but why? I shrugged it off. People forget stuff all the time. Maybe they'd be back soon to grab their load. I found an open machine on the other side of the room, dumped in my clothes, poured in some detergent, and got the washer going. As I sat down on one of those uncomfortable plastic chairs, I pulled out my phone, scrolling through random videos to keep me entertained. I was tired, but not so tired that I could just ignore the low hum of the other machine. I glanced over at it again, half expecting to see someone walk through the door any minute to claim their stuff. But no one came. I was sitting there, minding my own business, scrolling through my phone, trying not to pass out from exhaustion. You know how it is when you're up late and your body starts telling you it's time to crash, but you can't just yet. That's where I was. My clothes were spinning, the laundromat was still dead quiet, and that other washing machine was still running. The hum of the machines filled the space, and for a while, I started to zone out. Then I heard this noise. At first, it was faint, like a light rattle coming from the other side of the room. I ignored it, thinking maybe it was just the machine shaking a bit as it ran. You know, old machines in a cheap laundromat, no big deal. But the noise kept going, like something was knocking around inside. I looked up from my phone, squinting at the machine that had been running when I got there. The rattling wasn't constant, more like something was moving around inside every now and then, hitting the sides. It crossed my mind that maybe someone had thrown in shoes or something heavy that was causing all the racket. That made sense, right? Except it didn't. People don't just leave shoes to wash and wander off for an hour. I tried to shrug it off. Whatever it wasn't my problem. So I went back to my phone, desperately trying to distract myself. But then my washing machine beeped, signaling it was done. Finally, I stood up, stretched a bit, and went over to unload my stuff. I grabbed a basket from the corner and started pulling my clothes out. T-shirts, jeans, underwear, everything seemed fine. I tossed it all into the basket, but when I got to the bottom of the pile, something was missing. No, two things were missing. My striped socks. Now, I know what you're thinking. It's just socks, who cares? But these weren't just any socks. They were my favorite pair, the ones I've had forever. You know how everyone has that one pair that's more comfortable than the rest? These were mine, the ones with the red and blue stripes running around the ankle. I always made sure I didn't lose them, and now they were gone. At first, I thought maybe I just missed them in the pile, so I went through the clothes again, shaking each piece out to make sure they weren't stuck inside something else. Nothing. I checked the washing machine, sticking my head inside to see if they got stuck to the drum. Still nothing. Now I was getting frustrated. How does a pair of socks just disappear? I even looked under the machine, crouching down on that dirty floor, but there was nothing there except some dust and a few lint balls. It didn't make any sense. Socks don't just vanish into thin air. Then my eyes drifted back to that other washing machine, the one that had been running since I walked in. I couldn't explain it, but something about that machine was bothering me. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on with it than just this strange, rattling noise. I walked over to it slowly, peering at the spinning drum through the glass door. The machine was still going, but it was hard to see what was inside. The clothes were a blur as they swirled around. I leaned in closer, squinting, trying to make out the shapes in the load. And then I saw it, a flash of red and blue. It was quick, like a glimpse of something familiar. I leaned in even closer, pressing my face right up against the glass. And that's when I realized it wasn't just any clothes spinning in there. It was my sock, the one I'd been searching for. The striped one, the exact same one. I stared at it, my mind racing. How did it get in there? I hadn't touched that machine. No one else had come in since I arrived. Yet somehow my sock had ended up in someone else's laundry. My first instinct was to stop the machine, to open it up and grab my sock. But I hesitated. This wasn't making any sense. The logical part of my brain was telling me to leave it alone, that there had to be some explanation. Maybe someone accidentally took it from the basket at home before I left. But the more I thought about it, the less that made sense. The rattling noise returned, louder now, like something was banging around in the machine again. I took a step back, unsure of what to do next. My sock was inside that machine, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just some weird coincidence. Something about this whole situation felt off. Before I could figure out my next move, the glass door of the machine clicked open, and the rattling stopped. I froze when the door of the washing machine clicked open by itself. That rattling noise stopped immediately, like it was never there in the first place. The laundromat was eerily silent again, and I stood there, staring at the slightly ajar door. My sock was still inside, spinning along with the clothes, but now the door was just hanging open, the machine still going like nothing was wrong. I felt this sudden chill crawl down my spine. Maybe it was the cold air from the door opening, or maybe it was just my brain telling me something was seriously wrong, but either way, I wasn't sticking my hand in there. Not yet. I stepped back, my heart pounding, trying to figure out what to do. Then, just as I was debating whether to close the door or just leave, the front door to the laundromat swung open with a sharp creak. Instinctively, I jumped, spinning around to see who had come in. A guy walked in, tall, maybe in his mid-30s, with messy dark hair and scruffy stubble. His clothes were worn, like he hadn't changed in a couple of days. Faded jeans, a ratty hoodie, and boots that had definitely seen better days. He had this blank expression on his face, like he wasn't all there, almost like he was sleepwalking. But the strangest thing? He didn't even glance at me. Not once. Just walked straight to the washing machine that had been making all that noise, the one where I saw my sock. I stood there, frozen, watching as he approached the open machine. He moved slowly, almost robotically, like this wasn't the first time he'd done this exact thing. He didn't seem to care that the door had just opened on its own. He didn't even look at it funny. He reached inside, his hand vanishing into the pile of wet clothes, and pulled out a single item. I couldn't believe it. It was my sock. I watched as he held it in his hand, dangling it by the toe like it was just another random piece of laundry. It was unmistakable, the red and blue stripes, the worn fabric. My mind raced. How did this guy have my sock? How did it get into his machine when I hadn't touched anything? I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but it was getting harder to ignore the obvious. Something was wrong. "Hey," I called out, my voice a little shaky, trying to sound casual. That's my sock." For the first time, he looked at me. His eyes were dark, almost too dark, like there was no light in them. He stared at me for a moment, not saying anything, just holding my sock. Then, slowly, this strange, crooked grin spread across his face. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was more like he was enjoying the fact that I was freaked out. "Is it?" he finally said, his voice low, almost a whisper. I swallowed hard, nodding. "Yeah, man? I put it in that machine over there." I gestured to my own washing machine, the one I had used. "I don't know how it ended up in yours, but it's mine." For a second, he didn't respond. He just stood there, still grinning, like he was waiting for something. I could feel my skin crawling. The air in the room felt heavier, like the walls were closing in. I was starting to regret saying anything. Maybe I should have just let him keep the damn sock. Then, without a word, he shoved the sock into his pocket, turned, and started walking toward the door. Just like that. Like the conversation never even happened. "Hey, wait a second," I blurted out, stepping forward. I said, "That's my sock." He kept walking, ignoring me completely. My frustration boiled over. This wasn't some random misunderstanding. This guy was messing with me. I wasn't about to let him walk away with my stuff, even if it was just a sock. I grabbed my laundry basket, quickly tossing the rest of my clothes in, and rushed after him. As I stepped outside into the cold night air, I saw him already halfway down the block, walking at a steady pace like he had all the time in the world. I jogged to catch up, but by the time I reached the end of the street, he had vanished. I mean, he was just gone. 1 second, he was there, and the next, it was like he disappeared into thin air. I stopped, breathless, looking up and down the street. There was no one around. No cars, no people, nothing. Just the empty sidewalk stretching out in both directions. My heart was racing, and I felt this uneasy sensation in my chest. I was standing there, baffled, when I heard a noise behind me, like the soft click of a door closing. I turned back toward the laundromat and felt my stomach drop. The door was shut, the same door I just walked out of, except I hadn't closed it, and inside, through the glass, the washing machines were still running. But here's the thing, there were no clothes in them. The load that guy had taken out, the clothes I saw spinning inside, including my sock, they were gone, completely gone. I walked back to the door, peering through the glass, trying to make sense of what just happened. The laundromat was empty, but the machines still hummed, their drums spinning with nothing inside. I reached for the door handle, ready to go back in, but stopped short. In the reflection on the glass door, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. Behind me, on the sidewalk where the man had vanished, there was a shadow, a tall, dark shape standing perfectly still. But when I spun around to look, there was no one there. I stood there, frozen, my hand hovering over the laundromat door handle, staring at the spot where I had just seen the shadow in the glass. My heart was pounding in my chest, loud enough that it was all I could hear. I whipped around, scanning the empty street. Nothing. There wasn't a single person in sight. The sidewalks were empty, the air cold and still, and the only sound was the faint buzz of the neon sign above the laundromat. But I knew what I had seen. That shadow, tall, dark, and standing just behind me in the reflection, had been there. I wasn't imagining it. It couldn't have just disappeared, could it? I took a deep breath, tried to calm myself down. Maybe I was just tired, my brain playing tricks on me after such a long day. Maybe the flickering neon lights cast a weird shadow, and I saw something that wasn't really there. Yeah, that had to be it. I was just tired, exhausted actually. Still, something didn't feel right. The air felt heavier, like it was pressing down on me. My skin was prickling, and every instinct in my body was screaming at me to leave, to just walk away and forget this whole night ever happened. But part of me was too stubborn to let it go. That guy had taken my sock, and even though it seemed like the smallest thing, I wasn't about to let this whole situation end like some weird, unsolved mystery. I glanced back at the laundromat. The machines were still running, their steady hum filling the quiet street, but the clothes that had been inside were gone, completely vanished. I knew what I saw before. The guy had pulled my sock out of that machine. I hadn't imagined that. So where the hell did the rest of his clothes go? And how had he just disappeared like that? I wasn't about to go back inside. Not yet. Not after what just happened. So, instead, I started walking down the block again, my eyes darting to every alley, every shadow, hoping to spot the guy. I had a weird feeling that if I didn't at least try to follow him, I'd regret it. My pace quickened, my breath fogging in the cold night air as I scanned every dark corner. But the further I went, the more uneasy I became. He was gone. I mean, really gone. There wasn't a trace of him. 1 minute he had been walking just ahead of me, and now it was like he had never existed at all. There were no cars, no footsteps, no sound of anyone running. Just silence. I stood at the end of the block, looking around, my breath coming in sharp, shallow bursts. I felt like I was being watched. It wasn't just the emptiness of the street or the cold biting at my skin. It was this creeping sensation at the back of my neck, like someone was right behind me, waiting for me to turn around. I looked back over my shoulder, expecting to see that shadow again. But there was nothing, just the flickering lights of the laundromat in the distance. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what the hell was going on. How could someone just vanish like that? And where did his clothes go? I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but this whole situation felt off in ways I couldn't explain. Then I remembered something, the note. The crumpled piece of paper I had found stuffed in my laundry bag at the laundromat. I hadn't even thought about it again until now. But as the memory came flooding back, my stomach churned. Asterisk, you're next. Asterisk, that's what it had said. At the time, I thought it was just some stupid prank, maybe something Chris had slipped in as a joke. But now I wasn't so sure. I pulled out my phone, my fingers shaking as I unlocked it. Maybe I could call Chris or someone just to talk to someone normal and clear my head. But as I stared at my phone screen, something even weirder happened. There was no service. I frowned. I'd had full bars just a few minutes ago when I was in the laundromat. What the hell? I walked a few steps, holding my phone up, hoping to catch a signal, but nothing. Not even a single bar. I was standing in the middle of the street in the city. There should have been signal. But there wasn't. Panic started creeping in. I felt trapped, like the world was closing in around me, and I had no idea what to do next. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid, that there had to be some logical explanation. But it was getting harder and harder to convince myself. I looked up and down the street again, hoping, praying, I'd see some sign of life. But there was no one. It felt like I was the last person left in the world. I turned back toward the laundromat, debating whether to go back inside and grab the rest of my stuff, when something made me stop in my tracks. The door to the laundromat was closed. I hadn't shut it. I knew for a fact that I had left it wide open when I ran out after the guy. But now it was closed, and the lights inside seemed dimmer, like they were flickering, struggling to stay on. My throat tightened as I stood there, staring at the closed door, feeling like I was looking at a scene out of a horror movie. I took a step closer, and that's when I heard it again, the rattling. It was faint, coming from inside the laundromat, the same sound I had heard earlier when the stranger's washing machine had been running. But this time, it was slower, like something or someone was still in there, messing with the machines. I wanted to leave. Every part of me was screaming to turn around, to walk away, and never look back. But something kept pulling me back toward that laundromat, something I couldn't explain. So, against my better judgment, I grabbed the door handle, pulled it open, and stepped back inside. The second I crossed the threshold, the rattling stopped. The machines were still humming, but that eerie, unsettling noise was gone. The laundromat was exactly as I had left it. Empty, the lights flickering slightly, the smell of detergent still thick in the air. My laundry was still sitting in the basket by the folding table, untouched. But the stranger? Gone. No sign of him. No clothes in the machines. I stood there for a moment, trying to shake off the feeling of dread that had settled over me. I was just about to grab my basket and leave when something on the floor caught my eye. A sock. My sock. The one the stranger had taken. It was lying there, right in the middle of the floor, like someone had deliberately placed it there for me to find. My heart was pounding in my chest as I stared down at the sock lying on the floor of the laundromat. It was my sock, the same one the stranger had taken, the one with the red and blue stripes that I'd seen him pocket just minutes ago. But now, here it was, sitting in the middle of the floor, almost like it had been deliberately placed there for me to find. I bent down slowly, picking it up, my fingers trembling as I clutched the fabric. It felt cold, damp, and wrong. I stood there for a moment, staring at it, trying to make sense of what was happening. I knew this didn't add up. I had chased the guy down the street, and he had completely vanished along with my sock. And now, it was back, lying here in the laundromat like nothing had happened. I was getting that heavy, creeping sensation again. The same feeling I had when I saw the shadow behind me outside. It felt like I was being watched, but when I looked around, the laundromat was still empty. The lights flickered overhead, casting strange shadows across the floor, but there was no one else there. Just me. And then I noticed something even stranger. As I stood there holding the sock, I felt something crumpled inside, something that didn't belong. I hesitated for a second before slowly unfolding the sock, shaking it out. A small, wrinkled piece of paper fell out, landing softly on the tile floor. I knelt down to pick it up, my hands shaking. The paper was old, yellowed at the edges, like it had been crumpled and stuffed inside the sock for a long time. My stomach twisted into knots as I unfolded it, revealing the message scrawled across the page in jagged, messy handwriting. Asterisk, you're next. Asterisk. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I could barely breathe as I read them over and over again, my mind racing. You're next. What did that even mean? Was this some kind of threat? A warning? Who had written this? And why had it been hidden inside my sock? I felt my chest tighten as panic started to creep in. My first thought was that this had to be a prank. Maybe Chris was messing with me. He had always been the kind of guy to pull elaborate jokes, and this would be just his style. But as much as I wanted to believe that, something about this felt too real, too deliberate. The laundromat felt colder now, like the temperature had dropped, and the air was thick with tension. I glanced around again, half expecting someone to jump out from behind the machines, but there was still no one there. Just me and this terrifying note. My phone buzzed in my pocket, making me jump. My heart skipped a beat as I pulled it out, hoping for some kind of distraction, something to pull me out of this nightmare. But when I looked at the screen, I felt my stomach sink even further. It was a text message from an unknown number. Asterisk, did you find it? Asterisk. I stared at the message, my pulse racing. My fingers hovered over the screen, trying to decide what to do. I didn't recognize the number, and there was no name attached to it. For a second, I thought about just deleting it, ignoring it, and pretending like none of this was happening. But curiosity got the better of me. I typed a reply with shaky fingers. Asterisk, who is this? Asterisk, I hit send and waited, my heart pounding. Seconds ticked by, each one feeling longer than the last. I kept glancing around the laundromat, half expecting someone to burst through the door or pop out from behind the machines. Then my phone buzzed again. Asterisk, look inside the machine. Asterisk, my blood ran cold. I didn't want to look. I didn't even want to be here anymore. Every part of me was screaming to just leave, to grab my half-folded clothes and get the hell out of there. But something kept me rooted in place. That same gnawing curiosity. That same need to understand what was going on. I slowly turned toward the washing machine. The same one the stranger had been using earlier, the one that had been rattling and making all that noise. The door was still slightly ajar, hanging open just a crack, and I could see the inside of the drum from where I was standing. It looked empty. I took a deep breath, my hands shaking, and walked toward it. With every step, the air seemed to grow colder, the silence thicker. My heart was pounding in my ears, and it felt like time had slowed down. I didn't want to open that door. I didn't want to see whatever was waiting for me inside. But I couldn't stop myself. When I reached the machine, I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the handle. Then, with a shaky breath, I pulled it open. Inside, at the very bottom of the drum, was another crumpled piece of paper. I didn't want to touch it. I didn't want to know what it said. But I had come this far. I reached in, grabbed the paper, and slowly unfolded it. The handwriting was the same, messy, rushed, almost like it had been written in a hurry. But this time, the message was different. Asterisk, you can't leave. Asterisk, my chest tightened as I stared at the words, my pulse pounding in my ears. I felt trapped, like the walls of the laundromat were closing in around me. I turned, ready to bolt for the door, ready to get out of there as fast as I could. But when I looked up, my blood ran cold. The door was closed. The same door I had left open when I came back inside. I could see the dark street outside through the glass, but the door was shut, and the handle, it was moving. Slowly, it twisted like someone was on the other side trying to get in. I backed up, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in short gasps. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. I could only watch as the door handle turned all the way and the door creaked open, revealing nothing. No one was there. The door swung open, letting the cold night air rush in. The street was still empty, just like before. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there, watching me, waiting. I took a step toward the door, my mind racing, trying to figure out what to do next. But before I could make another move, my phone buzzed again. I looked down at the screen, my hands trembling. The message was short, simple, and it made my blood turn to ice. Asterisk, too late. Asterisk, My whole body felt numb as I stood there, staring at the phone screen. The message, too late, kept flashing in my mind. It was like the world around me had gone completely still. My heart pounded in my ears, but everything else was silent. Too silent. The kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. The laundromat felt colder than before, and the open door to the outside world seemed more like a gaping hole than an escape. I wanted to run. Every fiber of my being was screaming at me to get out of there, to leave everything behind and never come back. But my feet were glued to the floor. My hands shook as I gripped my phone, waiting for anything to happen. But the door just stood there, open, the dark street outside as empty as ever. No one was there. No shadow, no man, no one waiting to get me. I started to think maybe this was all in my head. Maybe I was imagining things. My phone buzzed again in my hand, snapping me out of my thoughts. I looked down, half expecting another message from that unknown number, but it wasn't a text. The washing machine, the one that had been rattling earlier, was making noise again. At first, it was faint, barely a whisper of a sound, but then it grew louder. That same rattling, like something heavy was tumbling around inside the drum. But I knew that couldn't be possible. I had just looked inside, and it had been empty. My hands were shaking as I took a few cautious steps toward the machine, my heart thudding in my chest. The rattling grew louder with every step, echoing through the laundromat, almost as if the machine was shaking from the inside out. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to move closer. My feet felt like lead as I dragged myself toward it. My mind was screaming at me to stop, to turn around, but I couldn't. Something was pulling me toward that machine. When I finally reached it, the rattling stopped. Dead silence. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the door handle. I didn't want to open it. I couldn't open it. But at the same time, I had to know. I had to see what was inside. With a shaky breath, I grabbed the handle and yanked the door open. The drum inside was still. No clothes, no shoes, no nothing. Just the empty, cold metal drum, shining under the flickering fluorescent lights. For a second, I felt relief. Maybe I was losing it after all. Maybe this whole thing was just some weird dream, and I'd wake up any minute now, safe in my bed. But then I saw it. At the very back of the drum, there was something wedged between the metal ridges. It was small, almost hidden by the shadows inside the machine. I squinted, leaning in closer to get a better look. My heart stopped when I realized what it was. A phone. It wasn't mine. It wasn't like any phone I'd ever seen before. The screen was cracked, and the case was scratched up like it had been tossed around for years. But it was definitely a phone, just sitting there at the back of the washing machine like someone had left it behind on purpose. I reached in, hesitating for a second before grabbing it. The moment my fingers touched the cold surface of the phone, I felt a sharp jolt, like static electricity shocking me. I pulled back for a second, staring at it. It didn't make any sense. Who would leave their phone in a washing machine? And why was it hidden there like someone wanted it to stay out of sight? I turned it over in my hands, trying to figure out what to do next. It felt heavier than it looked, almost like there was something inside it that didn't belong. The screen was dark, cracked, but when I pressed the side button, the phone lit up. The background was a photo, blurry, like it had been taken in a rush. I squinted at it, trying to make out the details. It was a picture of the laundromat, the exact same laundromat I was standing in. And in the reflection of the glass door, I saw myself. But not just me. Behind me in the photo was the man, the same man who had taken my sock. His face was twisted into that same creepy grin, standing just inches behind me in the reflection. My stomach churned, and I instinctively spun around, expecting to see him standing right there, right behind me. But there was no one. The laundromat was still empty. I looked back down at the phone, my hands shaking uncontrollably now. The screen flickered for a moment, and then it changed. A new message appeared on the screen, like a text notification, but I hadn't touched anything. The message was short. Just 2 words. Turn around. I dropped the phone, my breath catching in my throat. My whole body tensed as I tried to steady my breathing. I knew I was alone. I had just checked. There was no one else in the laundromat. But the message, it felt like a command. Like whoever had sent it was watching me, waiting for me to follow their instructions. Every part of me screamed not to do it, but I couldn't help myself. My body moved on its own. Slowly, I turned my head, my eyes scanning the laundromat, my heart beating so fast I thought it might explode. And then I saw it, the reflection in the glass of the laundromat door. It wasn't just me standing there anymore. Behind me, standing just a few feet away, was the man. The same man I had chased out into the street, the one who had vanished without a trace. He was there, standing in the middle of the laundromat, grinning that same twisted grin. His eyes were dark, almost black, and they were locked onto me. I spun around, ready to confront him, ready to scream or run or do something. But the second I turned to face him, he was gone, vanished. Again, I stood there, gasping for breath, my mind racing. This couldn't be happening. None of this was possible. My phone buzzed again in my pocket, pulling me back to reality. I grabbed it, my fingers shaking as I opened the message. This time, it wasn't from an unknown number. It was from my number. Asterisk, don't look back again. Asterisk. My blood turned to ice as I stared at the message. How was that even possible? How could I send a message to myself? And what did it mean? Before I could process it, the rattling started again. Louder this time, more aggressive. It was coming from the washing machine, the same one I had just opened. The sound was so loud now, like something was violently banging around inside the drum. But this time, I knew there was nothing inside. Or at least, there shouldn't have been. I took a step back, my whole body trembling. The rattling grew louder, faster, until it was almost deafening. I couldn't take it anymore. I bolted for the door, grabbing my laundry basket on the way out, my mind in a frenzy. I didn't care about the rest of my clothes. I didn't care about the phone in the machine. All I cared about was getting out of there. As I stumbled outside into the cold night air, the laundromat door slammed shut behind me, cutting off the sound. I stood on the sidewalk, gasping for breath, my heart racing. The street was still empty, the night as quiet as before. But the worst part? I knew, deep down, that this wasn't over, and I wasn't sure I'd ever escape it. The cold air hit my face like a slap, but it didn't help shake the fear that had settled deep in my chest. I stood on the sidewalk outside the laundromat, trying to catch my breath, but no matter how hard I inhaled, it felt like I couldn't get enough air. My laundry basket was heavy in my hands, but I didn't dare drop it. I was gripping it like a lifeline, as if the clothes inside could somehow ground me back in reality. The door to the laundromat behind me was closed now, but I could still feel its presence like it was staring at me. I knew if I turned around, I'd see that same flickering neon sign buzzing in the dark, casting its eerie glow on the glass windows. But I couldn't bring myself to look, not after what I had just seen in there. I had to move. I had to get out of there, but my legs weren't listening. They felt heavy, like I was stuck in place. My phone buzzed again in my pocket, and I nearly dropped the laundry basket in surprise. My hands were trembling as I pulled it out, half expecting another cryptic message from that unknown number. But this time, it wasn't a message. It was the screen itself, reflecting the street in front of me. And there, in the reflection on my phone screen, I saw something that made my blood freeze. The laundromat door. It was open again. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't heard it open. But there it was, the door standing wide open behind me, like it was inviting me back inside. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the reflection on my phone, my mind racing. I knew I had to turn around, but every instinct screamed not to. Not after the messages, not after seeing that man in the reflection earlier. But I couldn't help it. Slowly, I turned my head, bracing myself for whatever horror was waiting for me. The door was open, just like I saw in the reflection, swinging slightly in the cold night air. The flickering lights inside the laundromat cast long shadows on the floor, making everything look twisted, distorted. But that wasn't what made my stomach churn. In the reflection of the glass window, I saw myself standing on the sidewalk. But I wasn't alone. Behind me, barely visible in the dim light, was him. The man. The same man who had taken my sock. The same one who had vanished into thin air and reappeared in the reflection inside. He was standing just behind me, so close I could almost feel his breath on the back of my neck. and he was grinning that same twisted, unnatural smile, his dark eyes locked onto me. I whipped around, my heart in my throat, expecting to see him standing right there, inches away. But there was no one. Again, the street was empty. The laundromat was empty. I was alone, but the reflection in the glass had shown him, clear as day, standing there, watching me. My hands were shaking so badly now that I could barely hold onto my phone. I glanced at the reflection in the window again, half expecting to see him still standing there behind me. But now, the reflection showed nothing but the empty street and me, standing alone, my laundry basket still clutched in my hands like a lifeline. I took a step back, my mind screaming at me to get out of there, to run, to never look back. But as I took that step, the door to the laundromat slammed shut with a loud bang, making me jump. The sound echoed through the empty street, louder than it should have been. It felt final, like the laundromat had just shut me out, or worse, locked me out. My phone buzzed again, breaking the silence. I glanced down at the screen, my breath catching in my throat as I saw the same unknown number flash across the screen with another message. Asterisk, it's not over. Asterisk. I stared at the words, my mind racing. What did that mean? Was this some kind of twisted game? Some sick prank that had gone way too far? My body was trembling, and I could barely think straight. All I wanted was to get out of there, but something kept pulling me back to the laundromat. It was like the place had a hold on me. I looked around, desperate for any sign of life. But the street was still empty. No cars, no people, no sounds other than the distant hum of the city. It felt like I had been sucked into some kind of alternate reality where nothing made sense. Then, something caught my eye. In the reflection on the glass door, I saw movement. It was faint, barely noticeable, but it was there. I squinted, trying to make it out, my heart pounding in my chest. It was me, asterisk again, asterisk, standing in the reflection. But this time, something was different. I wasn't alone. There was another figure standing next to me in the reflection, but it wasn't the man this time. It was me. I blinked, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. It was like a mirror image, but wrong. My reflection was standing there, staring back at me, but it wasn't just mimicking my movements like a normal reflection would. No, it was doing something else. It was smiling, that same creepy, twisted grin the man had worn. I took a step back, my heart racing. My reflection didn't move. It just stood there, smiling back at me, watching. Then, slowly, it lifted its hand and pointed at something behind me. My blood ran cold. I didn't want to turn around. I couldn't turn around, but the curiosity was too strong. My body moved on its own, despite every instinct telling me not to. When I turned, I expected to see the man again. I expected to see him standing right behind me, his grin wide and his dark eyes locked onto mine. But there was nothing, just the cold, empty street. I turned back to the glass, hoping, asterisk praying asterisk, that the reflection would be gone, that whatever nightmare I was in would finally end. But when I looked at the glass again, the reflection had changed. My reflection was gone. But in its place, standing inside the laundromat, was the man. He wasn't grinning anymore. His face was blank, his eyes dark, hollow. He stood there, motionless, staring at me through the glass. Then, slowly, he raised his hand and pressed it against the inside of the glass door. I could see the outline of his fingers, cold and pale, against the foggy glass. My heart pounded in my chest as I took a step back. The man didn't move. He just stood there, his hand pressed against the glass, his eyes locked onto mine. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything to break free from whatever this was. But I was frozen in place, my breath catching in my throat as I stared back at him. Then, without warning, the glass door shattered. The sound was deafening, like a gunshot going off in the stillness of the night. I stumbled back, dropping my laundry basket as shards of glass exploded outward, scattering across the sidewalk. But when I looked up again, the man was gone. The laundromat was empty. There was nothing but the broken glass and the cold night air rushing through the open door. And in the middle of the shattered glass, lying on the ground, was something familiar. It was my other sock, the one that had been missing. Only this time, it was soaked in something dark, something that looked a lot like blood. I couldn't breathe. My eyes were locked onto the sock lying in the middle of the shattered glass. Asterisk my asterisk sock. The one I had been chasing this whole time. The one that had vanished into that stranger's laundry. But now, it was back, soaked in something dark and thick, something that looked too much like blood. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. The world felt like it was spinning out of control, like I had fallen into some twisted nightmare that wouldn't let me go. I couldn't focus, couldn't think clearly. All I knew was that I needed to get out of there. I needed to get as far away from that laundromat as possible. But my feet wouldn't move. My legs felt like they were made of stone, frozen in place as I stared at the sock, my heart pounding in my ears. The cold air from the broken door rushed past me, cutting through my clothes, but it wasn't the wind that made me shiver. It was the feeling that I wasn't alone. Even with the man gone, vanished like he always did, I could still feel his presence. It was like he was lingering, hiding in the shadows, watching me, waiting for me to make my next move. I looked around frantically, scanning the dark street, the empty laundromat, the broken glass at my feet. But there was no one there. I forced myself to take a step back, my eyes never leaving the laundromat. The lights inside were flickering more now, casting weird, jagged shadows across the floor, like the place was falling apart. I wanted to run, to scream, but it was like my body had shut down, locked in place by fear. Then my phone buzzed again, vibrating in my pocket. I jumped, almost dropping it as I fumbled to pull it out. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely unlock the screen. I expected another message from the unknown number, something cryptic, something terrifying. But it wasn't a message this time. It was a photo. I stared at it, my mind going blank for a second as I tried to process what I was seeing. The picture was of me, standing exactly where I was now, outside the laundromat, the shattered glass at my feet. But there was something else, something that made my blood turn to ice. In the photo, I wasn't alone. Behind me, just barely visible in the shadows of the broken laundromat door, was the man. He was standing there, his face twisted into that same horrific grin, his dark eyes locked onto the back of my head. His hand was reaching out toward me, like he was about to grab me. I whipped around, my heart in my throat, expecting to see him right there, inches away from me. But there was nothing, just the broken glass and the cold night air. I was alone. I gasped, trying to steady my breathing, trying to force myself to calm down. But it was impossible. My mind was racing, my body trembling. I felt like I was losing control, like I was spiraling deeper and deeper into some kind of madness that I couldn't escape. I looked down at the phone again, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold it. The photo was still there, taunting me, showing me a reality that didn't make any sense. My pulse was racing, my breath coming in shallow gasps as I scanned the street again, desperately searching for any sign of life, any way out of this nightmare. And then, just as I was about to turn and run, my phone buzzed again. I didn't want to look. I couldn't. But my eyes were drawn to the screen anyway, like I didn't have a choice. There was a new message from the unknown number. 2 words. Asterisk, don't run. Asterisk. My breath caught in my throat. My hands were shaking so badly now that I almost dropped the phone. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, to get as far away from this place as I could. But the message, those 2 words, they were like a command, freezing me in place. I stared at the phone, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. But there was no logic here. There was no reason. Just fear. Pure, unrelenting fear. Then something moved in the corner of my eye. I turned my head, my heart hammering in my chest, and saw it. The reflection in the shattered glass of the laundromat door. It was faint, barely noticeable, but it was there. The man, standing behind me. His face was pale, almost glowing in the dim light, and his grin was wider now, more twisted, more menacing. He wasn't just watching anymore. He was coming closer. I spun around, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode, but again, there was nothing. Just the empty street, the broken glass, the cold air biting in my skin. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to get out of there. Without thinking, I turned and ran. My legs felt heavy, like they didn't want to move, but I pushed through, my body driven by pure adrenaline. I didn't know where I was going, didn't care. I just needed to get away from that laundromat, from whatever nightmare was happening there. As I ran down the street, my phone buzzed again in my pocket, but I didn't stop to check it. I couldn't bear to see what new horror it might show me. I just kept running, my feet pounding against the pavement, the cold night air burning in my lungs. I turned the corner, sprinting down an alleyway, hoping, praying, that I could lose whatever was chasing me. But even as I ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The whole time, I could feel eyes on me. I could hear footsteps echoing behind me, even though I knew no one was there. The city around me felt darker, emptier, like I had slipped into some parallel world where nothing made sense. I kept running until my lungs burned, until my legs felt like they would give out beneath me. I didn't stop until I reached the next block, where the lights of a nearby gas station flickered in the distance. I stumbled toward it, gasping for breath, my heart pounding. The lights of the gas station were like a beacon, a promise of safety. I could see a car parked by the pumps, a man inside leaning on the wheel as he waited for the tank to fill. There were people here, real people, normal people. I staggered up to the door of the convenience store, my hands trembling as I pushed it open. The bell above the door chimed softly, and for the first time all night, I felt a glimmer of hope. But then I looked at the cashier behind the counter. He was staring at me, his eyes wide, his face pale as a sheet. He didn't say a word. He just pointed slowly, shakily, toward the glass window behind me. I didn't want to turn around. I didn't want to see what he was pointing at, but I had to. I turned, my heart in my throat, and looked through the glass. And there, standing just outside the gas station door, was the man. His twisted grin stretched wide across his face, his dark eyes locked onto mine. He raised his hand, slowly, and pressed it against the glass. I could see the outline of his fingers, cold and pale, against the window. Then he smiled wider, his eyes narrowing as he mouthed 3 words. Asterisk, you can't escape. Asterisk. My heart stopped when I saw him. Asterisk, the man, asterisk, standing outside the gas station door, his pale hand pressed against the glass. His eyes were locked onto mine, his grin even wider now, so twisted and unnatural that it made my stomach turn. The fluorescent lights from inside the store barely touched him, like he was a shadow more than a person. But he was real. He had to be real. I wasn't imagining this. I couldn't be. Could I? I stumbled back, almost knocking over a display of snacks, my pulse racing. The cashier was still staring at me, his face pale, his fingers still pointing at the door. He wasn't saying anything. He didn't need to. The fear in his eyes said it all. He saw him too. This wasn't just in my head. I looked back at the door, but the man hadn't moved. He stood there, his hands still pressed against the glass, his grin so wide it looked like his face might split in two. But the thing that terrified me the most wasn't his smile. It was his eyes. Those cold, dark eyes that seemed to see everything. They were locked onto me like I was the only thing in the world that mattered to him. My phone buzzed again in my pocket, and I flinched, the sound jolting me back into the moment. I didn't want to look at it. I didn't want to see whatever new nightmare it had in store for me. But my hand moved on its own, pulling the phone out, my fingers trembling as I unlocked the screen. There was a new message from the unknown number. Asterisk, come outside. Asterisk. My throat tightened as I read the words. It felt like a command, like I had no choice but to follow it. But every part of me was screaming to do the opposite. I wasn't going outside, not with him waiting for me. The cashier finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. You okay, man? I didn't know what to say. How could I explain this? How could I tell him that I was being followed by someone, asterisk something asterisk, that shouldn't even exist? My mouth opened, but no words came out. I just stood there, frozen, my eyes darting between the man outside and the terrified cashier. Another buzz, another message. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. The new message flashed across the screen. Asterisk, it's your last chance. Asterisk. My hands shook and my heart raced. What did that mean? What would happen if I didn't go outside? Or worse, what would happen if I did? I turned to the cashier, desperation creeping into my voice. "Do you see him? The guy outside?" The cashier nodded slowly, his eyes wide. "Yeah, man? What's his deal? You know him?" I shook my head, my throat too tight to speak. I didn't know him. I didn't want to know him. All I knew was that I had to get away, and fast. But something about the message, last chance, made my skin crawl. What if I was trapped? What if he didn't leave? No matter what I did. I turned back to the door, my hands shaking so badly that I could barely hold my phone. The man was still there, his hand pressed flat against the glass, his grin wider than ever. But now he was doing something different, something worse. He was mouthing the words, "Come outside." I shook my head, backing away from the door. "No," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I'm not going out there." Another buzz. Another message. "You can't escape." I swallowed hard, my chest tight with panic. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't stay here, but I couldn't leave either. I was trapped. The cashier was still staring at me, confused, scared. He didn't understand what was happening, and honestly, neither did I. Then, without warning, the lights inside the gas station flickered. They dimmed for a moment, then came back on, but weaker, like something was draining the energy from the room. The cashier glanced up at the ceiling, his brow furrowing. "What the hell?" And then the lights went out. Complete darkness. I gasped, my heart hammering in my chest. The store was pitch black, the only light coming from the faint glow of my phone. I spun around, trying to orient myself, but I couldn't see anything. I could hear the cashier breathing heavily somewhere nearby, but I couldn't even see him. Panic surged through me. Then, through the darkness, I heard a sound that made my blood turn to ice. The door. It was opening. I spun around, squinting into the darkness, my breath catching in my throat. I couldn't see anything, but I knew what was happening. The door was opening. He was coming in. My phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up in my hand. Another message. Too late. A cold wave of dread washed over me. I knew it. I had waited too long. I should have run when I had the chance, should have done something, anything, but now it was too late. And then I heard the footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing through the darkness. They were getting closer, closer to me. My phone was still the only light, and as I held it up, I saw something that made my heart stop. The reflection. In the glass of the front window, I could see myself standing there, trembling in the dark. But behind me, just a few steps away, was the man. His face was twisted into that same terrible grin, his dark eyes locked onto mine. He was getting closer, closer. I spun around, expecting to see him right there, inches from my face. But again, there was nothing, just the suffocating darkness. I was losing my mind. I couldn't think straight. I stumbled backward, my feet slipping on something wet, the sock, and nearly fell. The footsteps grew louder, more deliberate, like they were circling me. And then, just as I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the lights flickered back on. The store was empty. The door was closed. The man was gone. I stood there, gasping for breath, my body trembling, my mind racing to make sense of what had just happened. The cashier was staring at me from behind the counter, wide-eyed, but he didn't say anything. He didn't need to. I looked down at my phone. The screen was dark, no messages, no notifications. It was like nothing had ever happened. But when I turned to leave, something caught my eye. Something on the floor, just by the door. It was my sock, the one I had been missing. The one soaked in something dark. Only now, the dark stain had dried, leaving behind a faint, rust-colored mark. And next to it, scrawled in what looked like the same substance, were 3 words. You can't escape. I stared at the message for a long time, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to believe it was over, that whatever nightmare I had just lived through had ended. But deep down, I knew the truth. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. And no matter how far I ran, no matter what I did, I knew he'd be back.